Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Nearly 2 million more economic impact payments disbursed under the American Rescue Plan. Continuing payments reach approximately 163 million. IR 2021-95, April 28, 2021, Washington. Today, the Internal Revenue Service, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and the Bureau of the Fiscal Service announced they are disbursing nearly 2 million payments in the seventh batch of economic impact payments from the American Rescue Plan. So we're talking about economic impact payment round 3, EIP 3, seventh batch going out, 2 million payments apparently in the seventh batch. So if you haven't received your economic impact payment yet, this might be the time. It might be in the seventh batch here. So today's announcement brings the total disbursed so far to approximately 163 million payments with a total value of approximately $384 billion since these payments began rolling out to Americans in batches as announced on March 12th. The seventh batch of payments began processing on Friday, April 23rd, with an official payment date of April 28th, with some people receiving direct payments in their accounts earlier as provisional or pending deposits. Here's additional information on this batch of payments. So in total, this batch includes nearly 2 million payments with a value of more than $4.3 billion, more than 1.2 million payments with a value of over $3 billion went to eligible individuals for whom the IRS previously did not have information to issue an economic impact payment, but who recently filed a tax return. So if you're in a situation where you, for example, didn't get an economic impact payment 1 or 2, it's possible the IRS doesn't have your information, and so they're going to need that information typically, or if your circumstances had changed, to give them the information, you file the tax return for 2020 at this point in time, even if you're not required to file a tax return due to your income being below a certain threshold. It might be useful to do so. One reason it could be useful to do so is to be eligible, give the IRS the information necessary to process then the economic impact payments. Note that the first 2 rounds of economic impact payments are different than the third. However, or the remedy to solve any kind of problems of not receiving them is a little bit different. However, they all kind of center around filing the 2020 tax return. In other words, EIP 1 and EIP 2 are prepayments of a credit, the recovery rebate credit, on the 2020 tax return, and filing the 2020 tax return possibly then could pick up those payments by actually getting a refund that you would calculate in the form of a recovery rebate credit on the tax return. Round 3 will not be on the tax return. You're not going to calculate it. You're not going to see it on the bottom line as basically a credit, but filing the tax return will give the IRS the information if you have not received the payment so that they can then process the payment. And it looks like that has happened for many people because 1.2 million payments went out, and it looks like in that category for $3 billion simply in round 7 here related to situations such as that. So this batch also includes additional ongoing supplemental payments for people who earlier this year received payments based on their 2019 tax returns, but are eligible for a new or larger payment based on their recently processed 2020 tax returns. So this is another kind of predictable problem that happened with EIP 3, and that is the fact that it went out before many people had filed their 2020 tax return, and they would want to base it on 2020 tax return because EIP 3 is basically, we would think of, if it follows the same pattern, a prepayment of a credit on the 2021 tax return. So they would like to base that prepayment on the latest tax return, which would be 2020 if had been filed, but because it's the beginning of the year that they issued it, they may have based the payment on 2019. Now there's an income cap as well, and if your income is over the cap, you won't get the full amount or possibly any amount of the economic impact payment. The predictable problem here is that in 2019, many people's income are going to be higher most likely than 2020 because that's when the whole issue happened, and obviously the economic impact payments are there to support people whose income went down in 2020. So in that situation, if you didn't get an economic impact payment or not the full amount, due to the fact that they based it on 2019 and your income was higher, and then your income was much lower in 2020 due to everything going on in 2020, The remedy is to file the 2020 tax return. Now, filing the 2020 tax return does not have any calculation of EIP3 on it again, but the IRS, if you file it, will then be able to pick it up on their side and hopefully give you this plus up payment, as they have been doing here, automatically without having to wait until the end of the year to file the tax return for 2021 in order to assumably get the recovery rebate credit based on the economic impact payment actually being tied to 2021. That's way too far away. They want to pick it up sooner. So remember, the 2020 tax return for EIP 1 and 2, you do have the recovery rebate credit to remedy any problems. For economic impact payment 3, you want to simply file the tax return, nothing about EIP 3 or the related recovery rebate credit on the 2020 tax return for EIP 3, but simply filing it can give the IRS the information to make any adjustments that are needed, including this plus up kind of situation. So this batch includes more than 730,000 of these quote plus up end quote payments with a value of over $3 billion. Overall, the seventh batch of payments contains about 1.1 million direct deposit payments with a total value of $2.5 billion and about 850,000 paper check payments with a total value of more than $1.8 billion. Additional information is available on the first 6 batches of economic impact payments from the American Rescue Plan, which processed weekly on April 16th, April 9th, April 2nd, March 26th, March 9th, and March 12th. So if you want to look at any of those payments and see what went out in those batches, they have links to that here. There'll be a link to this in the description. The IRS will continue to make economic impact payments on a weekly basis. Ongoing payments will be sent to eligible individuals for whom the IRS previously did not have information to issue a payment, but who recently filed a tax return, as well as people who qualify for the quote plus up end quote payments. So hopefully most of the people have gotten the payments at this point in time. The people that have not gotten the payments, you would think, would be the people where the IRS doesn't have the information yet, and therefore if you file the 2020 tax return, that would help, or the people that have this plus up situation where the 2019 tax return resulted in a lower amount than if filing the 2020. Again, remedy, file the 2020, and the IRS should be able to pick that up. Special reminder for those who don't normally file a tax return. Although payments are automatic for most people, the IRS continues to urge people who don't normally file a tax return and haven't received an economic impact payments to file a 2020 tax return to get all the benefits they're entitled to under the law, including tax credits such as 2020 recovery rebate credit, the child tax credit, and the earned income tax credit. So if you're not required to file a tax return, remember, that does not mean that you do not benefit from filing the tax return. If you're under the threshold of needing to file, it's because you don't owe any taxes, most likely because your income possibly is below the standard deduction. The IRS isn't going to come after you if that's the case, meaning you don't have to file. The IRS isn't going to get mad and try to come after you. But if you were to file, you still might get money back, even though your tax liability would be zero, because of these refundable type credits. This year, of course, we have the unique situation, which might continue into the following years, which was the recovery rebate credit. So that's one issue. But you also have the other credits, which could be refundable credits like the earned income tax credit and possibly part of the child tax credit. So those two are things that if you haven't filed, you probably want to check it out. File, you got free software that's available to you. File, see what it looks like, see if any of these things are applicable, and if it's worthwhile to file. And once you do, then if it does benefit you, you might want to look into the prior years as well and see if it would have benefited you to file in the prior years. You might not have access to free software to do that, but you might, pull the resources together to buy the software or something, or get help if it's beneficial to file the tax returns. So filing a 2020 tax return will also assist the IRS in determining whether someone is eligible for an advance payment of the 2021 child tax credit, which will begin to be disbursed this summer. So they're also doing this prepayment for the child tax credit thing that's going to happen. And if they don't know about you, then they don't have the information for the tax credit. So you want to make sure that if you want that prepayment. So once again, this is a situation where it's a 2021 tax credit that you wouldn't normally get until you file the tax return for 2021, which wouldn't happen until 2022. But the IRS is going to try to give you the credit first and then reconcile the whole thing out when you file the tax return. So notice this is good. It's getting the payments out sooner. It is complicated, however. This is complicating the tax situation, especially for lower income individuals that would be getting these types of credits. And so, be aware of that. And tax software hopefully can be helpful in solving some of the complication, or at least working through some of the complications with it. So just keeping on top of your tax filing is probably the best thing to do, and using tax software can help to do that. So, for example, some federal benefits recipients may need to file a 2020 tax return, even if they don't usually file, to provide information the IRS needs to send payments for a qualifying dependent. Eligible individuals in this group should file a 2020 tax return as quickly as possible to consider for an additional payment for their qualified dependents. So another situation that many times is someone was born in 2020 and they don't file a tax return, so the IRS didn't know about it, didn't send out the payment, or the payment went out based on something other than a tax return, like Social Security or other federal benefit programs, and the IRS wouldn't then have any dependent information in that case either. So if you file the tax return, just an informational return to give the IRS the dependent information, they might be able then to process the payments for the economic impact payments related to the dependents. People who don't normally file a tax return and don't receive federal benefits may qualify for these economic impact payments. This includes those experiencing homelessness, the rural poor, and others. Individuals who didn't get a first or second round economic impact payment or get less than the full amount may be eligible for the 2020 recovery rebate credit, but they'll need to file the 2020 tax return. See the special section on irs.gov claiming the 2020 recovery rebate credit if you aren't required to file a tax return. There's a link to that here. Free tax return preparation is available for qualifying people. There's a link to that if you want to look into the free tax return preparation. Note that free preparation usually applies to the current year. So if you want to take advantage of the free software or free preparation help, then you want to do it in the current year, because if you let time pass, for example, if you want to go into the prior year to get help and free software and whatnot, you might not be able to do it. It might have expired. So if you have prior returns that you are considering might be beneficial to file, you might want to first do it in 2020, where you get access to free preparation, possibly free software, and see how beneficial it is to file. If you're not required to, you still might be beneficial to do so. And then if it is beneficial, to go into the past and see if you want to then file the prior years, if it's worthwhile to do so based on what you found out as you filed 2020. Also note that if you do not have information and you go into prior years and you're like, I don't have the W-2s or the 1099s and whatnot, the IRS basically has that information. So you could go to your employers and whatnot and get it there. That would be the best place to go. But you might not want to talk to them anymore or something, So you might go to the IRS website and see if you can get that prior year documentation to help you to file the tax return. In other words, the IRS could probably, for most, lower income people, file the tax return if you just have W-2 income, because they have all the information. They can make the tax return themselves, possibly because it's already been given to them. They have the W-2s, the 1099s, but they don't do that because it's your responsibility to file it, and they might not have other information and whatnot. So you can basically, for prior years, get your W-2 information and whatnot from the IRS, populate it into the format they want to see it, which is a tax return, give it back to them in the format of a tax return, and then you might qualify for some of these other refundable credits and whatnot. So in any case, the IRS reminds taxpayers that income levels in this third round of economic impact payments may have changed. So they have changed. This means that some people won't be eligible for the third payments even if they received first or second economic impact payment or claimed a 2020 recovery rebate credit. So the AGI limitations went down. So if your income goes up, then you may not receive the credit over a certain threshold for income levels. So payments will begin to be reduced for individuals making $75,000 or above in adjusted gross income. If you're not married, $75,000, meaning not married filing joint, $75,000 or above starts to phase out. It caps for them at $80,000. $150,000 for married filing jointly, and then that caps at $160,000. So meaning if you're over that amount, you don't get the economic impact payment due to income level limitations, the phase out. So people with adjusted gross income above these levels are ineligible for a payment. Individuals can check the Get My Payment tool on irs.gov to see the payment status of these payments. Additional information can be found on economic impact payments is available on irs.gov. There's also a link to Get My Payment and economic impact payment stuff here, and there'll be a link to this in the description.